Thank you, Jan. You might remember the novel Ordinary People by Judith Guest. It was later made into a great movie by Robert Redford in 1980. Won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Tells the story of the Jarretts, a suburban Chicago family unraveled by tragedy. A year after their teenage son, Buck, drowns on a boating trip, his younger brother, Conrad, attempts suicide. Conrad was there with Buck when he died, so he's racked with guilt and depression and survivor's guilt. He's committed to a psychiatric hospital, and after 4 months of treatment, he's back home and back at school where the story picks up. Conrad's father, Calvin, tries his best to be supportive, but Conrad's mother, Beth, well, she's retreated into a hard shell of control. She keeps a very meticulous home. She keeps her grief neatly buttoned up, and she tries to maintain this image of a perfect family, this facade. But under that polished veneer, she's cold and she's distant, especially to Conrad. The truth is, she may even blame him for Buck's death. By outward appearances, they're holding it all together, but on the inside, they are broken. The pain is thick. The family is fractured. And yet somehow, they stumble their way toward healing. It's not a tidy ending where everything is wrapped up neatly with a bow, but it's honest. Because love does not erase any damage that's been done. Love works through it. Families can be tough to navigate sometimes. I think they always have been. Because the dynamic of a family is intimate, and it's emotional, and it's powerful. You are linked with people who you grew up with, or they grew up with you, or they raised you, or you raised them, siblings, parents, children. Families are intimate ecosystems where we're shaped, sometimes wounded. And if we're lucky, we're supported, and we're cheered on, and we're healed. Our families really are who we are. Whether by birth or by choice, family systems define so much of how we see ourselves and our world. And as long as abuse wasn't part of the equation, there's no single perfect right way to be a family. One thing, though, is usually true, whether it's spoken out loud or not. We very often expect our adult lives to look a lot like the family that we grew up in, however we might define what a normal family is. Either we imitate the family of our childhood, or we work hard to create its polar opposite, especially if our childhood was full of pain. Even then, dysfunction has a way of being passed down from generation to generation, sort of like an outdated GPS system, guiding us in the same old traffic jams. If we want to change direction, we need the courage to ignore the voice telling us to turn right and instead choose a new road entirely. And that takes moral imagination. I'm drawn to family systems theory because it explains more than just the dynamics around a family dinner table. Businesses, clubs, and even nations operate a lot like families. We sometimes call our church a family. But any group bound together by a common identity and a shared history and a set of beliefs about itself, it can think of itself as a family. And if we really pull back, if we were astronauts orbiting the Earth, maybe we would see us all, as diverse and as dazzling as we are, as one big human family. Now, one of the greatest challenges about being a family member, whether it's your personal family, or if you think in terms of, let's say, the American family, is the relationship of the individual to the whole. How can we be our unique self while remaining connected to a larger whole, even when parts of that whole are hard for us to deal with, when we might distrust them, when we can't fathom their thought process? How do we stay true to who we are when our family is pulling in the opposite direction, when it feels so out of sync with who we are? I've heard that question a lot in the last several years, so let me wade into some troubled waters, but tenderly, I hope. I think it really first caught my attention in the lead up to the election in 2016, almost 10 years ago. I heard from friends and church members, and I experienced this within my own family, the stress that was happening in other families. Siblings who once joked over holiday dinners now argued with each other over text messages or emails. Adult children blocked their parents. Grandparents felt alienated from their grandkids. It was hard to understand how Americans could be so bitterly divided, especially within their own families, with competing visions and understandings of our shared history, of who we are, and the direction we should go. It seemed like we stopped merely disagreeing over things. We somehow began dehumanizing each other and declaring that someone else started it first. So when white supremacists marched on Charlottesville and a counter-protester was killed, some people saw that as a display of free speech, while others understood that that event exposed the ugliest parts of our collective story, the legacy of racial hatred that's tragically still very much alive. When evidence of climate change tells us we're running out of time, there are those who believe in that science and those who refuse to believe it. And when COVID changed all of our lives, and that could have been a golden opportunity to rally around a common cause, we saw our divisions emerge even more sharply. When George Floyd was tragically killed, instead of coming together in peace and with a resolve to be and to do better as a society, we fought over how much we believed that systemic racism was a real thing. On and on and on. January 6th, overturning Roe versus Wade, the border, Gaza, immigration raids, defunding agencies that do scientific research to keep us safe, you name it. Weekly, if not daily, a new flashpoint pops up. And so often we didn't even know it was considered to be an issue. And the trenches just keep growing deeper that divide us. But it's not just division, it's contempt. It's well beyond the point of, I think you're wrong. It's now, I think you're dangerous. We sincerely feel threatened and we fear for the future. Not long ago, a few years ago, I met a man at a restaurant. He was wearing a polo shirt with a Johnson & Johnson logo embroidered on the chest, and beneath the logo were the words, COVID vaccine team. And I smiled. I asked him if he had worked on the COVID vaccine. Duh. He hesitated, obviously very tense, so I added quickly, thanks. That's the one I got. Good job. And he visibly became relieved. He said, some neighbors, even family members, give me a really hard time. And he said, I don't wear this shirt in public much. It's just not worth the drama. We've become so fragile, so tribal, that the simple act of gratitude for life-saving medicine becomes a potential landmine. What can we do about that? Well, first, let's consider what we're supposed to make of Jesus' words in Luke chapter 12. He says, do you think I've come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but division. Not exactly the Hallmark greeting card version of Jesus, is it? But Jesus, if we read this carefully, he's not saying that he wants division. He's saying division is inevitable. When truth meets denial, when light touches darkness, when love confronts power, sparks are going to fly. Now, in his time, Jesus challenged two dominant religious political factions, the Pharisees and the scribes. And what we often miss today about his interactions with those groups is that those two groups of people absolutely loathed each other. They were the first century versions of hard right Republicans and far left Democrats. Not a bad analogy. But in Jesus, they found a common cause. They agreed on one thing, that he was a threat to their way of being, to their way of understanding God, and a threat to the power and the influence that they possessed. So why was he a threat? It was because Jesus proposed a third way to understand who we are in relation to each other and in relation to God. He proposed a radical reimagining of God. God not as as remote and transactional, but a God that's immanent, right here, right now, and transformative. Not a God who rewards rule followers, but a God who already lives in us and through us. A God who breathes love into our lungs and calls us to breathe that love out into the world. But that vision was just too much for them, for those gatekeepers, the scribes and the Pharisees, who were always fighting over who was wrong and who was right. The vision of Jesus was up here above that. It was too generous, too inclusive, too uncontrollable, really. So yes, Jesus divides because truth divides, love divides, not to destroy anything. Love divides to heal. Love disrupts old patterns so something new can emerge. Jesus says, you've got to start with yourself in the present moment. To see God and affirm the presence of God in yourself, and to see and affirm the presence of God in everyone, even your social and political adversaries. And that can be a hard one, but Jesus says, love them, no exceptions. And Jesus knew that what he was saying was rather out there for most folks. Might be out there for you and me. And that it would cause those who could never accept such a radical idea about the nature of God to dismiss him. Because God had been taught from days of old as being separate and inaccessible. You know, unless you do certain things in a certain way and you say all the right words in the right order. The division between people comes when my absolute way of thinking about God bumps up against yours. So for me to be right, you must be wrong. That's why we have things like denominations. But that concept of God and how we argue about religion was just taken for granted in Jesus' day, and even today. Many people still carry around an image of God as some kind of a cosmic scorekeeper. Do the right things, believe the right things, and you'll earn your prize, salvation. Get it wrong? Too bad. But Jesus tore down that idea with a sledgehammer. And the idea that any of us hold the absolute truth on God, that too. He proposed a third way. What if, he asks, God is not far away, waiting to be appeased? What if God's already here, immanent, already within you and within me? Within every single person you meet, even with those with whom you seem to disagree over everything. What if our job is not to earn God's love, but to awaken to it and to live it out? What if God's waiting to breathe through us and to speak and to act in love that knows no limits and no boundaries and that cannot die? For that to happen, let's go back to the notion of family. Our one big human family. Not a system of coercion and control over each other, not a marketplace where some humans are winners and others are losers, but a laboratory of grace where we're experimenting all the time on how we can do better. Not a mirror of our worst instincts, but a school for practicing better ones. Because whether we like it or not, we are all related. We share a common history, a common planet, a common destiny, and a common calling to love one another as kin, as family. Now, we're not all the same. We each carry our own wounds. We see the world through different lenses, but that doesn't mean that we do not still belong to one another, because we do. And the only way to be true to ourselves and to our deepest God-shaped self is to recognize that the divine that is in you is the same as the divine that's in me, and it's the same as the divine that's in everyone else, no exceptions to that. And that is good news. That's the gospel. And it is our family obligation to share that good news. Now, right now, our social family, our national family may be a big, dysfunctional, broken mess. Some of our own families may be that way too. But through God's love, we can still find a way. Because what's the alternative? We must find a way. And I believe with God's grace, we will find a way. Amen.